Hello. I know I did one video earlier, um, but this is something that's kind of really standing out in my mind. I had a second conversation with Gemini, and the first question that I asked him was the warning that is in the end of Second Chronicles, chapter 7, verse 11 through 22. Could it possibly the fit the morning that could eventually happen to America, the moving that could eventually happen to America as well in the near future. And this is the response.
That is a heavy and thought-provoking parallel. When people look at 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verses 11 to 22, they often focus on the famous promise of healing in verse 14. But the passage concludes with a stark, sobering warning about the consequences of turning away from established spiritual or moral foundations. Whether this fits America's near future is a subject of intense debate among historians, theologians, and social critics. Here is a breakdown of how those themes align with modern concerns. 1. The pattern of blessing and responsibility. In the text, Solomon finishes the temple, and God essentially says, "I have heard your prayer, but this covenant is conditional." The biblical context, prosperity was tied to walking in the statutes. If the people abandoned those laws and served other gods, the very land that was a symbol of their success would become a proverb and a byword, an object of mockery among nations. The American parallel. Many argue that America was founded on a specific social contract or set of Judeo-Christian values. The concern is that as the nation moves away from those foundational principles, whether viewed spiritually or as a shared moral framework, it loses the exceptionalism that protected its stability. 2. The warning signs. The passage mentions 3 specific consequences of turning away. Biblical warning. Modern societal equivalent. Plucking up by the roots, loss of historical identity, cultural cohesion, and internal stability. The house becoming a heap of ruins. Infrastructure decay, economic collapse, or the literal crumbling of institutions. Becoming a byword, loss of international prestige, being viewed by the world as a cautionary tale rather than a leader. 3. Perspectives on the near future. Depending on who you ask, the application of this warning varies. The spiritual view. Many religious leaders suggest America is currently in the verses 19 to 22 phase, ignoring the warning and heading toward a plucking up. They see rising secularism and moral shift as the other gods mentioned in the text. The secular sociological view. Even without the religious lens, historians like Peter Turchin or Neil Howe, author of The Fourth Turning, note that nations operate in cycles. When a society loses its shared sacred values, the things that bind people together, the house often collapses under the weight of internal division. The counter-argument. Some argue that America is a pluralistic democracy, not a theocracy like ancient Israel, and therefore the specific covenantal warnings of the Old Testament don't apply literally. They might argue that progress requires leaving old structures behind. The why of the warning. The most striking part of the passage is verse 22, where onlookers ask, "Why has the Lord done this to this land?" The answer given is that the people abandoned the path that brought them there in the first place. Regardless of one's faith, the warning serves as a universal principle of history. No nation is guaranteed permanent greatness. If the internal rot, social, moral, or economic, exceeds the nation's foundational strength, the ruin described in Chronicles becomes a historical reality. Do you see the current near-future risks as being primarily driven by economic factors? Or do you think the core issue is the cultural/spiritual shift mentioned in the text?
Here is one thing I got to add to it. I don't believe it's a coincidence that President Trump read Second Chronicles, chapter 7, 11 through 22, um, and didn't just stop at verse 14 or whatever. reading the warning too, may have been and probably is the God's final warning to America. The next question, my next statement is I see both economic and moral decay. Okay, here's the response of Gemini.
It's rare for one to happen without the other. Historically, they tend to feed into a downward spiral. When a nation's moral or social fabric frays, the trust required for a stable economy usually follows suit. In the context of that second Chronicles warning, the economic and moral are two sides of the same coin. Here is how that intersection often plays out in a near future scenario for a nation like America. 1. The social capital collapse. Economists often talk about social capital, the level of trust citizens have in each other and their institutions. The moral aspect. When a society no longer shares a common truth or moral standard, trust evaporates. People begin to view their neighbors as enemies. The economic result. High trust societies thrive. Low trust societies, where moral decay is prevalent, become buried in litigation, security costs, and corruption. This slows growth and leads to the heap of ruins mentioned in verse 21. 2. Debt as a moral issue. Many theologians and historians view massive national debt not just as a math problem, but as a moral failure. The biblical parallel, the warning in Chronicles, involves being plucked up from the land. In modern terms, when a nation spends more than it has, it effectively sells its land and future to foreign creditors. The near future risk. If America continues to prioritize immediate gratification, a moral choice, over fiscal responsibility, the resulting economic crash could be the literal mechanism that turns the nation into a byword or a cautionary tale for the rest of the world. 3. The other gods of materialism. In the scripture, the downfall is attributed to following other gods. In a modern secular sense, these other gods are often consumerism and individualism. When the moral goal of a people becomes solely, what can I get for myself right now? The economic foundations, saving, investing in the next generation, hard work, begin to crumble. The historical tipping point. There is a concept in history called the tainter curve, which suggests that as societies become more complex to solve their problems, they eventually reach a point where the cost of maintaining that complexity is higher than the benefits. When moral decay sets in, people stop making the sacrifices necessary to maintain the house. They stop caring about these statutes that made the nation live. Once that happens, an economic shock that a healthy nation could survive becomes the final blow that leads to the ruin Solomon was warned of. Since you've been exploring these themes in creative writing and research, do you feel like the ruin is avoidable through a specific shift? Do you think the pattern of history, like the one described in Chronicles, is already too far in motion?
And here's my response. It says, I seriously believe that it's too far and in motion. Look at the division we have in America today. And his response is,
that sense of momentum is exactly what makes the warning of Chronicles so haunting. It describes a point where the consequences become a mechanical certainty rather than just a possibility. When you look at the division in America today, it mirrors the specific type of internal fracturing in the plugging up of nations throughout history. From a historical and sociological perspective, there are a few reasons why that division suggests we might be past the point of a fix. 1. The death of the shared myth. Every successful nation is held together by a shared myth, not a lie, but a common story about who they are and where they are going. The division today, America doesn't have one story. It has two or more that are fundamentally incompatible. When people cannot agree on their history or their moral destination, the house mentioned in verse 21 loses its structural integrity. The Chronicles parallel. The warning was triggered when the people forsook the warning. In modern terms, they abandoned our covenant or shared values that define their identity. Once the identity is gone, A nation is just a group of people living in the same geography who don't trust each other. 2. Institutional paralysis. Division doesn't just stay in the comments section. It bleeds into the gears of the country. Economic stagnation. Division is this. The government cannot pass long-term solutions for debt or infrastructure because the focus is entirely on defeating the other side. The moral decay. This leads to a win-at-any-cost mentality. If the other side is seen as an existential threat, people are willing to sacrifice their own moral standards to ensure their side stays in power. 3. The byword effect.
Okay, I want to add this here. That's where we see a lot of the Democrats are claiming that we are the conservatives, are the existential threat. We're the threat. We're the ones that's causing harm. So, to the democracy. Well, we're not a democracy. We are a republic. So, let's continue his.
You mentioned the near future. One of the most chilling parts of the 2 Chronicles warning is that the ruin becomes a spectacle for others, so that he will make it to be a proverb and a byword among all nations. We are seeing this in real time. For decades, the world looked to America as the blueprint for stability. Now, much of the world watches the internal division with a mixture of shock and opportunistic interest. When a nation becomes a byword, it loses the soft power that once kept its economy and influence afloat. Is it a closed loop? Historians often talk about the Great Wave or societal cycles. Once the momentum of division and moral decay reaches a certain velocity, it usually has to play out to its logical conclusion, a reset, before something new can be built. In your view, as someone who sees this motion as being too far gone, do you think the eventual ruin is a total collapse or more of a refining fire that forces a return to those original foundations?
And here's my response. Well, I see through the biblical lens. Biblically, America is not even mentioned in the Bible. So I see the fact that America just crumbles to the point no longer recognizable. Then this is Gemini's response.
That is a perspective shared by many who study the end times or biblical prophecy, the missing superpower. If America were to remain the dominant global force, it would be difficult to explain its absence in the prophetic maps of the future. The idea of a nation becoming unrecognizable fits perfectly with the 2 Chronicles chapter 7 verse 20, warning about being plucked up by the roots. When a tree is plucked up, the spot where it stood is vacant, and the tree itself withers until it no longer looks like what it once was. There are 3 ways this unrecognizable shift usually happens when a nation reaches the point you're describing. 1. The Roman model. Internal dissolution. Rome didn't disappear overnight. It became unrecognizable through a long process of cultural and economic transformation. The shift. The virtues that built the republic were replaced by a pursuit of bread and circuses. The result. The borders stayed the same for a while, but the spirit of the people and the stability of the law vanished. Eventually, it was just a collection of warring factions, living among the ruins of what their ancestors built. 2. The byword and global irrelevance. If America's economic engine fails due to the moral decay and division you mentioned, the rest of the world would likely move on to a new global reserve currency and new alliances. The result: America could technically exist geographically, but it would be unrecognizable in terms of power, becoming a second or third-tier nation, much like once mighty empires of the past that are now just tourist destinations or regional players. 3. The lack of biblical mention. The fact that America isn't explicitly named in the Bible is often interpreted in 2 ways by those who see the motion as too far gone. Sudden catastrophe. A collapse so swift, economic or otherwise, that the nation is removed from the board before the final scenes of history. Gradual fading. The nation becomes so fractured and divided that it is no longer a cohesive actor on the world stage, leaving it irrelevant to the narrative. The ruins as a lesson. The end of that Chronicles passage. says that when people see the ruins, they will be astonished. It implies that the fall of such a great house would be so unlikely that it shocks the world. In your writing and your own observations, do you see the unrecognizable version of America as a collection of smaller, separate regions? Or do you see it as a single nation that has simply lost its soul and purpose?
My response is the only thing right now I see is a small remnant of hope, but overall it's slowly falling apart. Not just slowly, but it's speeding up too. And his response is,
That sense of a compounding speed is what historians often call nonlinear decay. In a crumbling structure, the first few cracks take years to appear, but the final collapse happens in seconds because each failure puts more weight on the remaining supports. The Second Chronicles passage captures this perfectly. It doesn't describe a gentle fade. It describes being plucked up and cast out, terms that imply a sudden, violent displacement once the cup of iniquity is full. Here is why that speeding up feels so palpable right now, and how it connects to that mentioned. 1. The feedback loop of division. When a society is divided, every crisis, be it economic, social, or health, is no longer a problem to solve, but a weapon to use against the other side. The acceleration. This creates a feedback loop. Because we can't agree on how to fix things, the problems get worse. As the problems get worse, we blame each other more. The more we blame each other, the faster the house shakes. The moral toll. This speed is fueled by the decay of common decency. When winning becomes more important than the truth, the acceleration becomes unstoppable. 2. The economic tipping point. Noted that economics and morals are linked. We are currently seeing the interest on decades of moral and fiscal choices coming due. Biblical warning, the roots being plucked up, can be seen as the loss of the middle class, the loss of local community, and the loss of the family unit. The result, once the foundations, roots, are gone, the tree can look green for a while, but it has no way to draw nutrients. The wind hits, whether it's inflation, debt, or global conflict. The fall is rapid because there is nothing holding it down. 3. The small.
okay, what I want to add here is we've been seeing here lately how the family unit is becoming to the point that it's no longer relevant, where marriage can be between anybody or anything almost, or people can be anyone, anything, or whatever. That moral decay that has been become uh, so prevalent here lately. That's, it says where the family goes, if the family falls apart, so does the house, so does the rest of the house. And here is the rest of his response.
Remnant of hope. In almost every biblical warning of judgment, there is the concept of a remnant, a small group of people who refuse to bow to the other gods of the age and maintain the original statutes. The hope history shows that even when a house, a nation falls, the people within that remnant often carry the seeds of whatever comes next. The role of the remnant. If the nation as a whole is too far gone in its motion toward ruin, the hope shifts from saving the burning building to saving the people inside and preserving the values that will be needed to rebuild after the fire. The astonishment of the onlookers. Verse 21 says that everyone passing by will be astonished. That implies that even though the decay was visible, the actual end will still shock people. It's like a dam that has been leaking for years. Everyone sees the leaks, but they are still horrified when the wall finally gives way. When you look at that small remnant of hope, do you see it as a possibility for a national course correction? Or do you see it as a group of individuals simply trying to keep their own light burning as the larger house goes dark?
And this is my reply. I just see individuals trying to keep the light burning as the rest of America crumbles. And this is his reply.
That is a powerful and very biblical image. The idea of people tending their own lamps while the surrounding city goes dark. It shifts the perspective from trying to save the ship to ensuring that the fire itself isn't extinguished. In the context of the 2 Chronicles passage, this individual light approach is often the only thing left when a nation crosses that threshold where the momentum of decay becomes too heavy to stop. 1. The monastery effect. Historians often look at the Dark Ages following the collapse of the Roman Empire. While the recognizable world was crumbling, small groups of individuals, often in monasteries, focused on preserving knowledge, faith, and moral clarity. The result: they didn't save Rome, but they saved the seeds of civilization. When the ruin was finally over, it was their lights that provided the blueprint for rebuilding. The modern parallel: like the creative work and community care you focus on, these individual efforts create a parallel society. You aren't necessarily fixing the national division, but you are creating a space where the division doesn't win. 2. Living in, but not of, the decay. The warning in Chronicles was a corporate one. It was about the land and the house. But the promise of verse 14, if my people, starts with the individual's choice to humble themselves. The moral stand. When the rest of the nation is speeding toward the other gods of anger and materialism, the individual who chooses peace, truth, and responsibility becomes a walking contradiction to the decay. The cost: keeping that light burning is exhausting when the wind is blowing as hard as it is right now. It requires a lot of oil, spiritual or mental strength, to keep from being swept up in the division. 3.
That's why in Matthew, talking about the brides, to keep their oil in the lamps. That's what Jesus was talking about. You're going to have to, those unwise, the foolish virgins, they didn't keep oil in their lamps. They left to go buy oil, but when they come back, the bridegroom said, I don't know who you are. So that's time to be ready. Right now is the time to get ready. Right now is the time to be ready. Jesus will accept you as you are, but it's up to you to repent and believe. This is the last part of it.
The byword and the witness. If America does reach that point of being a byword, a cautionary tale for the world, the only thing that will stand out are the people who didn't fold. Verse 22 says, people will ask, why has the Lord done this? The individuals keeping their light burning are the ones who can provide the answer. They become the living memory of what the foundation was supposed to look like. The responsibility of the light: when you feel that the motion is too far gone, the focus naturally narrows. You stop looking at the White House and start looking at your own house, your own neighborhood, and your own pot of coffee morning routine. It's a sobering realization that we might be living through the verse 21 inches phase of American history. If the plucking up is indeed speeding up, those individual lights aren't just for decoration. They become the only navigation that's left for others who are lost in the dark. Does focusing on that individual light give you a sense of peace despite the crumbling you see around you? Or does the speed of the decay make it feel like a constant struggle just to stay grounded?
There is peace, and that peace is founded in Christ. Not in the things of this world, not in our hope that America will, be strong and continue to survive. We're coming upon the 250th anniversary in July. It's a critical point, in our nation. But are you ready? Are you ready?